Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, show where we code a complete game live on stream. Before I get started, I wanted to mention the fact that our new comic has come out. It came out Monday, in fact. I don't stream during the week these days, so I didn't have a chance to tell anyone about it. But it's called Meow the Infinite, and it's super awesome, especially if you like cats in space. It's pretty easy to try reading. You can just go to meowtheinfinite.com, and there's a big old first issue button. You click on that and you can just start reading the comic, right? And off you go. So check it out if you like comics at all. It'll be updated about once every 2 months, and if you want to know when new issues are posted, anyone who signs up for the Molly Rocket mailing list gets immediately notified. If you ever are on the Molly Rocket mailing list, we send out an email anytime we update one of our projects. So that's also an easy way to know when new issues are coming out if you like it. So give it a shot and see what you want. You can also buy the digital deluxe edition of it if you're really into it. Comes with a lot of cool stuff like really high quality PDFs of all the chapters that you can read online. Plus, every time there's one chapter we don't place online, so you can read the extra chapter like several months early, which is pretty awesome. There's also a big making of book with tons of concept art and stuff like that, and desktop wallpapers and all that good stuff. So check all that out, meowtheinfinite.com, pretty easy to go to. I think it's also linked to from Handmade Hero somewhere. If you're on the watch page, there's a little other projects thing below it now, so you can jump to our other projects pretty quickly. So it's right there at the top. Anyway, let's get started here. We left off last time, which was not last week because we had a 4-coder jam last week, so we didn't stream. But the week before that, we left off kind of at a place where we sort of have some grunt work to do now, because we did a bunch of work to move our asset system over to a place where it kind of could take sort of these text input files that said, here's all the stuff I want to pack up and how I want to pack it up. And those sorts of things were going to sort of replace any kind of file naming conventions or any of that sort of stuff that we had been using before, just because we kind of finally decided that this was the best way to ship it, to be like, this is the final version. And so doing that, I would like to, get that system shipped and done. The problem is that we wrote it all and we have not really started debugging it, right? So we have some pretty unsavory work to do today, which is we have to sort of debug the system. We've got to actually go follow everything through and get rid of anything in there that's not working properly, which there probably is a fair bit of because we wrote a ton of stuff and moved a ton of stuff over. The chances that we didn't make any mistakes, very, very low. The other thing we have to do is make the text preservation part of things. So at the moment, what we wanted to do, in addition to, obviously reading these files and packing all of our art assets from them, and I think we pretty much finished that part, meaning there's really not, I don't think there's much of anything left to do there other than the debugging and polish part of it. The part that we did not do yet is just if you want to rewrite a file. So you load Handmade Hero up and you go into the edit mode and you adjust parameters of the art. So for example, the main thing right now that we edit inside the game, because it's pretty hard to edit outside the game, it would be really cumbersome, is how sprites are aligned. You want to have a head that snaps onto a body at a particular point, or a enemy holds a shield and you want to snap the shield on at a particular point. That is something that we want to be able to mark up in game because it's just way faster to be able to drag a little slider and see exactly what the result is, because then we know we got it right and it looks right. If we had to just blindly edit some constant outside, to be blindly edit the constant, run the game, it's wrong, blindly edit the constant, run the game, that's not a good feedback loop. So you want all that stuff to be live. But the problem with having it be live is once you edit it, you've got to preserve it, right? If you don't preserve the data that you edited live, then you have no way of actually using those edits long term. So what we want to do is we want to be able to take those edits, which we already made all that, right? That all works. but we want those edits to be saved back to something that's not the game pack file. We even currently write them back to the pack file. So if you just wanted to like pack everything once, tweak all the art assets, and then ship the game, that would work. We actually wouldn't have to do anything because it writes it back to the HHA pack file, so we're done, right? But I want to have a permanent way of like checking into source code control the packing list with all of those markups in there. So all of the stuff that was like, place this point here, snap this to this, that sort of stuff should all go in there. And so that's the thing that we don't have right now. We can parse the file, we can pack from the parsed file, modulo the fact that we have to debug it, right? And so that's all fine, but we now need the way of rewriting, like hit save and rewrite that file, right? So it's basically like the change needs to get written back. That's all. So we want to do that, and we, like we're not far from it, but obviously we have a little bit of work to do before we get to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and load up Handmade Hero here. And we're just going to take a look at where we were at. Now, remember, we essentially have no change. Like, we did all this, but we haven't, like, removed our old HHA files that were built without this system, right? So we're running in debug mode here. So, again, the lighting is, of course, very slow. But otherwise, you can see, like, everything's fine. It's loading all of the assets correctly, right? And so it's still using the old HHA files. So we essentially have two goals, and we can probably, if we want to, tackle them in series. So the first goal we could have here is deleting the HHA file that has all of the current game art assets in it, and trying to get back to this screen. So looking like this with all of the assets correctly loaded, that's something we could do to prove that we don't have bugs in this new sort of manifest listing style art packer thing, right? So we want to do that. And that seems like a reasonable thing to start with, especially since it's been 2 weeks instead of 1. That'll just get us reacquainted with the code, right, so that we can remember what it is that we're doing. Handmade Hero is weird, like, they're so long between programming sessions, normally it wouldn't all page out of your brain. So it's worth, taking it cautiously like that. So anyway, if we take a look back at the Handmade Hero data directory, which is the thing that we care about in this case, you can see here that we've got our data, and we have like an intro art v2 HHA, we have a local.hha, and then we have some other .hhas that were kind of old things too, like these test ones, test fonts. These are all HHAs that have been forever. We even made a converter to convert the old ones forward. So what we want to do now is basically get rid of all of these and start trying to build a base game.hha that essentially matches our local HHA. Because remember, local HHA was the thing we used to import all the PNGs. And so now what we want to do is make it so that when our packing system runs, it'll create a base game.hha that it'll just generate all of that stuff. All of the stuff that was going into local HHA will all go into base game.hha. That's our first goal. Our second goal would be same thing with intro art v2. So intro art v2.hha was again all of the stuff that we had that came from the intro cutscenes that we also have PNGs of now. We want to take all of those PNGs and pack those into an intro art version, right? And so these two we can completely replace. This goes away, so we don't care about. I'm sorry. These two we completely replace. So they would go away, and we replace them with new ones. Base game.hha would replace this one, and intro art.hha would replace this one. And then these, I think, basically don't have anything we really need in there. So the only thing we would be left with is the fact that we don't have any way to build fonts right now outside of our external tool. And we can decide what we want to do about that. But I suspect what we will do is we will just actually make a font PNG, and we will mark the font PNG up. So I think we'll stick with the system that we've got right now to a certain extent. And and we'll just import it from a PNG. Because we can make a PNG that just has each character in like its own grid cell, and then we use the same import process we've been using. Pretty much that just works, right? So I think we should be okay. We'll see what happens. We'll give it a shot. But that's basically what we want to do. And then once we've gotten that debugged, then we can switch over to let's make sure rewriting works. And rewriting, again, is just the process of taking these tags files here that list all the things that should be inside an HHA, rewriting them basically without mutating them at all, other than inserting any edits that we've made or replacing lines, that should have been in there or something like that, right? Okay, let's take a look. Inside our asset system here, one thing that I think might be nice to do at this point is there's just too much stuff in here. And so I think what I might just start with today as a simple thing we can do is inside Handmade code, we've got the Handmade asset.h and .cpp, right? I'm going to make a thing called Handmade import. And the reason for that is we've just got a lot of code now that does this sort of thing. And I don't really want to have to worry about it anymore, right? Like, I don't want it to be inside my asset system that runs at runtime as the actual, like, gameplay code and all that sort of stuff. All this stuff only happens if somebody is saying they want to do dev work on the game and add art assets or something like that, right? So there's just a huge amount of code here that I can pull out and say, look, this is going to be sort of a separate chunk of code that only gets used during importing, right? So I'd like to keep all of this stuff separate here, just so I can see that, like, all right, there's a bunch of things that are like runtime asset work, but there's also a bunch of things here that are not, right? That are sort of things that only are really relevant to people editing the game, and that's just kind of a separate issue, right? So I'm just going to pull those functions out sort of slowly here, right? And just make sure that I've got enough stuff for that. So like reserve tags, reserve asset, that sort of stuff. Like, these are just not things that matter to the runtime performance of the game at all. And so I don't really want them in there so that so that people aren't confused about what is and isn't actually part of the runtime stuff. So, you can see here, now we've got sort of back to our much more streamlined asset system, and only the things that actually matter to the asset system proper will be in there. And then here what I can do is pull out also the things from the H file. So for example, this import type is only used by that asset importing. There's also stuff down here that is only used for like the HHT fields context, the import grids and tagged arrays. All of this stuff, again, only used if we are doing that sort of import process. So I'm just moving that over. Now, I don't care about this is not an actual segregation. I'm not actually trying to draw a clean line through these two pieces of code. I don't care if they're still intermingled. Meaning, like, for example, inside this game asset structure, there's still things that are only used for importing potentially, right? So that's fine, right? I don't mind about that at all. I'm not trying to like clearly delineate these. All I really want to do is just have a rough separation of the two so that I have a vague idea, at least, of what I expect to be happening in import time versus what I expect to be happening at runtime. As we move forward and I'm finished with this system way down the line, maybe I will want to do a harder separation between the two as an exercise to ensure that the import side stuff is never happening in-game or doesn't have any effects on the in-game stuff, or so that you don't have to port that stuff, things like that. So I don't really know whether I want to go further down that road or not, but what I do know is that I definitely don't want to keep piling all the import stuff into that file because it just makes it too confusing as to what is happening when I'd like to be able to keep them separated. So I'm going to go ahead and rebuild here. I don't actually know whether, I don't actually know whether or not I I still use the asset memory block stuff. I'm going to just quickly ask that question because I'm curious. Yeah, I don't. So those were just vestigial remains, so I'm going to get rid of those. You can see now that the in-game editor is trying to call parts of the asset system that we have removed. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to just include the file that I created that sort of we separated out. I'm going to go ahead and add that back in here so that we've got it. We could make this only in internal builds eventually if we wanted to, but at the moment I'm not going to bother with that. Again, those are things we can do a little bit further down the line if we so choose. I'm not super concerned about them at the immediate moment. All right, so here we go. Let's just put those in there. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I want that. I think that actually it's not asset import. It's just import. And so now we should get those pieces in there. You'll have to excuse me. Like we still haven't updated our forecoder. I should really do that next week. Before next week, I promise I'll update the forecoder. All right. So we've got those two things separated out now, and so what I want to do next is start by, we're in debug mode, I'm going to start by trying out this code, right? So I want to get my import changed assets code working so that basically what will happen is at any time, if you want to, you can delete, for example, I could go in here to, yeah, sorry, I'm already there. I can go in here and delete this base game.hha, and then when you call like the import changed assets code, it will automatically look at the tag file. It will rebuild the HHA from that tag file and produce a complete pack, right? I want that to work. That's thing one. Thing two is if I change the tag file or a PNG, and I hit update, it will rebuild those the same way. So basically, like anytime I want to, I can just reload anything that I think should be reloaded, and it'll just work. So that's what I'd like to do now, if that makes sense. So let's see if we can get that working. So let's just start by calling import changed assets, step through it, see how it goes, and every time we find a bug, fix it. Eventually, hopefully, we'll get to the point where it just works, and that's all we need to do. Now, I don't actually want to have to click a button to do that, so what I'm going to do is just make it so that Handmade Hero just calls import changed assets automatically because it can. And so what I'm going to do is add a call up here to this, so that it's like, look, if anyone wants to call it that, you can. And then in the asset system proper, once the asset system has actually loaded everything, so like in here, after it gets down to the bottom, it's like, all right, we're good to go. We've got all of our assets loaded and we're ready to play the game. I'm just gonna force this call here. So that way, when you start up the game, it will automatically go, hey, let's double check, make sure everything's kosher. And that way, while I'm debugging it, I don't have to like manually go click a button to get started. And this is just a general theme that happens anytime you're debugging things. I highly encourage thinking about how to reduce the amount of physical steps necessary to do the debugging, because at the end of the day, the debugging time will take as long as it takes, and anything you can do to shorten that up by reducing manual steps, you're winning back time for yourself, right? So I highly recommend, making sure you think about, oh, could I just add some code to this thing I'm debugging to make it much shorter to debug? That's great, right? That's always a good win there. So here we go. Let's go ahead and take a look, and you can see here we've finished compiling. So let's go over to our debugger, and I'm going to set a breakpoint there on that import changed assets call right there. And so it should happen right at the beginning. I'm going to start with the nothing case, quote unquote, meaning I'm going to start with no HHA, and then later we'll try creating an HHA and having it fail. Creating an HHA and having it have to merge into it. So we'll try some different things and we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to start running. Hopefully I get a breakpoint right here, and there we are. Visual Studio does some weird things. You know, hey, I'm still waiting for a new debugger. Hopefully we'll get one sometime soon that's not Visual Studio. But, you know, it does some stupid stuff like if you have an if statement, I don't know what just changed there. If you have an a pound if statement, even though Visual Studio knows it's not building this file because we haven't created a project for it, it's just an XZ, and it knows it's not building this file, it still thinks it has the information necessary to know whether pound ifs are on or off. It doesn't. So it assumes that they're all off because, of course, none of these have been set. It's just really bad, right? It's essentially giving you completely false information that especially a beginner programmer might get really confused about what was going on here. Oh well, that's just, you know, Microsoft being Microsoft. So if we end up in import changed assets here, I guess I for some reason deleted that breakpoint, but I want it. Sorry, leave that on. So here at import changed assets, we're going to slowly step into the code. You can see me getting all of the HHTs here from the platform layer, so we want to load all of our tag files. We start out parsing the tag file. So here we go. We're going to open up one of these tag files here and read all of the tag file in, so we've got it entirely in memory. You can see that happening. In fact, I can even just open up the tokenizer that would have it. You can see that the pointer to the characters, which is here, right? Yeah. No? Is that wrong? Oh, I haven't started it yet. There we go. So you should be able to see, like, once we tokenize it, all of the data from the file is, like, this is the file, right, is now loaded in here. So this is the intro cutscene information, and you can see that it's just got a bunch of stuff for the author here. Oh, and you know what? Actually, let me fix one thing before we get started. Somebody mentioned this. I don't know if they reported it in the GitHub. Let me see here. Two-factor authentication. Ladies and gentlemen. Okay. So everyone now who wants to snarf my two-factor authentication can do it. I should probably time it so that I only enter it at the last possible second so that anyone who is trying to hack my account won't have much time. All right, so if I go into the bug list, let's see here. Here it is. There we go. So in the bug list, yes, I was going to say I thought someone had reported it, and they're right. So if you look, I accidentally had these backwards. So Anna is the person who did the title screen, and Yangshin is the person who had who did the cutscene stuff. So they were just backwards, and so we might as well fix that because I happen to be looking at it, and it's done now. So I think that's all good. So I'm going to close and comment that. And hopefully that takes care of that issue. That was just a mistake. All right, so moving on. So if we go ahead and say, look, we want to get this thing loading properly. Let me run back to where I was. So we're going at the intro cutscene one first. So when we load this up, we're starting to tokenize it. We grab a token. We look at what the token is, and it looks like the token is an identifier. And let's see what it actually is. That token is default, and actually we don't have a HHA context, and we get an error here. That error is totally correct. And so the question now so here's something that's actually pretty interesting about that, right? Is we don't actually have any way to put these errors anywhere. So like if you look at what happens, the error goes out to an error stream, and we're never going to see it, right? So it would be nice if there was some way to like display those errors or something, but we don't really have any way of doing that. And so that's another thing that we probably have to look at. But for now, it told us the error, so we know that we've got an error in here actually. And so let's just go ahead and fix that error, right? And we'll sort of figure out how we display errors to the user later. So you can see that what we need here is an HHA directive. This was the old way we were doing things. We decided we didn't like that because we didn't want to have to parse. We don't actually allow you to change the HHA inside one of these. We want that to be something that you permanently sort of state. So here's a way to permanently state that. There's HHA intro cutscene, right? So there's the like preprocessor directive-ish kind of thing that we made. So that should fix that parse error, right? Which was correct. It was an ill-formed HHT file. All right, let's run it again. So now we're going to come through here, parse the HHT. In theory, now we will get a include directive, essentially. An HHA directive. We will try to create that HHA by its stem, and the stem text is exactly what we think it should be, intro cutscene, right? So we jump in here, and let's take a look. We try to find it, and we can't find it because we haven't loaded that yet. In fact, it doesn't exist at all. Create if not found is true. And so we come through here, we're going to actually need to create it. So we create a path we can pass to the platform layer. Here it is, data intro cutscene.hha. We take a look, we say, all right, let's try to open that. Assuming there are no errors, we create a dummy header and write it to the file. We then initialize it and say, why don't you load this in? So we kind of come through here and try to load it in. That's us doing this here, and we say, all right, there are no errors, that's great. So now it's initialized, and everyone is happy. This seems broken. Interesting. So if you look at this loop here, we may kind of have a bug in this loop, but the bug looks like it only happens in the case where we've already got like another bug, which is that the file size should not have been 0 because we wrote stuff to it, so it should be larger than 0. That file info is getting passed in here, and so you can pretty much see where the error is. When we create the file, we don't reopen it, right? So we're passing in a file info that's not valid anymore, right? And part of this is just because our file system stuff is kind of janky. We've kind of gone through several rounds of deciding we wanted to do more stuff with files than we had hoped. You know what I mean? And so at this point, it may be the case that we really would rather do something a little bit different here, because it's sort of becoming a little bit too cumbersome, right? But if you take a look here at get or create HHA by stem, what I'd like to do here is I would like to have some way of refreshing this file info, right? And at the moment, we don't have that. What I can do instead is literally just call it again. So I could say here, like, this, right? So, not great, but we know what the problem is, and we can patch around it for now, which is fine. But I'm going to flag that with a to-do because it's not fabulous, right? So, we'll take a look. So if I jump back there to the getter create, what I should do is delete that file because I want to run that test again, and now that thing exists. So I want to delete that and I want to watch that happen again. So if I go ahead and step in there, let's go here. I don't know why I keep deleting that. There we go. If I go ahead and step in there, I want to take a look. Yeah, so that's we created. I want to take a look and see now if we get the right file size for that. So let's jump in here. Let's go to the getter create. So that first directive right here, that's going to getter create that file. We're just looking for the file here. I'm going to set a breakpoint when we actually go to init it and verify that the file info actually has some size now. It does, so that should fix that problem. We come through here and we create it, and then we do the watermark retraction. That should just work because the high watermark should actually just be exactly the same as it was. Of course, Visual Studio doesn't let me inspect file because we've fallen out of here. I don't know why they changed that. It's horrible. Anyway, so once we grab the results, now we've got the file sort of ready to go. And in theory, that should give us what we need to start importing from this file. So into the context, which is something that we use for doing further importing, we have some additional fields here, like what file index we are going to be importing into. Again, that's just kind of a useful thing for everything that we load to shove into the right file. And we've got the rest of the stuff like the default fields here and so on ready to be populated. Right now they don't have anything in them though. So I'm going to go ahead and start going forwards through here. So when we parse, we should now get some identifiers that we can actually process. So we come in here and now we succeed because we've added that HHA directive. Remember before it was failing out on the default block. So here's the default block. What we should see happen is we should parse this default block, hopefully. Our copy all up to and including currently doesn't do anything. Since I want to debug this, you can see this is where we got to when I ran. So that means we didn't really hit any bugs yet. We just have that not implemented. That's where we're going to start copying the thing from one to another. I'm going to get rid of that right now because we're not doing that yet. So I'm just going to say, look, we're assuming that we wrote something right there, and we'll go from there, right? So I'm going to go ahead and run up to there. This is where we were, and keep going. So first things first, we create a place to write the tag array. If we need to, what's going to happen here is we're not going to use that because we're actually parsing a default block, which has no data. It's just setting default fields. So you can see us pulling out those default fields. Let's see if we got them right. So here's the default fields. We're about to fill these out. We wrote these into, I think, just a thing called fields, right? Yeah. So we wrote these into a thing called fields. So here's what we parsed, right? Author, description, name is not set, which is correct because we don't have a name set for any of this stuff here. And so I don't know if we're going to use that or not ever, but it's possible anyway to do. So then what we're going to do is say, look, the parsing succeeded. Is it a default? It is. So set the default fields equal to the fields we parsed. There they are. So I think that's fine. We're then going to end the temporary memory because we're finished parsing that block. And then we can keep going. So hey, the default parser worked fine. That's good news. Now we get to something that actually needs to be imported. And here's where things should get significantly saucier. So here's our parse top level block call. Here I come through the parse top level block call. It is not a default this time. So now what I need to do is I need to parse out where the art is actually going to come from. So here is that file name. You can see titlescreen.png being set there. And that titlescreen.png is where we need to grab the art from. So first we have to construct a path string that tells us where it comes from. You can see us doing it with our format string function we wrote. And so here it is. That's probably not the best way to view it. Let's do it like this. So it's source intro cutscene art titlescreen.png. Did we construct it properly, we can find out. Let's take a look from the starting directory, which is this is where the game runs from. If we look in source, it's sources. So no, it's already wrong. That's where it actually is. So we needed an S there, and we didn't have one. So we can stop right now because we know that none of our stuff will import properly because that was supposed to be an S, and it's not an S. So if we take a look at that sources, that's in the import here. That just needed an S at the front of it, like so, and that's all we needed. All right. Try one more time. No errors there. If I go ahead and set a breakpoint here, we should be able to jump directly to it. So here we go. Let's produce that again. Now this time we should get a pass sources intercutscene art title screen. That's now what we do expect to see. So that's good. Now we're going to try to get that file and see if the OS can load it. It can. Let's see if it got the file size right. It looks like it did. So we're good to go now. So the first thing we do is look to see if we have a match for this particular asset source file. In this case, we don't, I don't think. So we wouldn't have seen this one before, right? This isn't something that we would know where it goes. So when we get back this match, it should be basically a fresh match with nothing in it. It should just have nothing anywhere in here. And I assume like the errors stream shouldn't have anything in it, right? Yeah, it doesn't. And the asset indices should be all zeros. So it's basically just a fresh stream with nothing in it. Doesn't have the date or the checksum or any of that stuff set. Now that part, I'm not sure if that's what we want because that should get set. And I guess the only thing that I'm a little concerned about here is the fact that we don't set it till afterward. Like, we don't set that stuff until here. But I guess that's okay because the only time that we would have nothing set in there is when we will absolutely get to there because it means we've never loaded it before. So I think that's okay, but it's structured a little weird. The code could definitely be better. Anyway, we're going to go into parse pieces and we're going to look at what this actually is. I don't actually know what it is. Oh, it's a plate, right? It's a title screen plate. Yeah. So the title screen plate doesn't have any asset tags to set because it's just a plate, and plates don't have asset tags other than the ones listed in the HHT file, so it's just an import type setting, and it doesn't change the tag array. So the tag array stays null. Off we go. So we need a full rebuild here because we've never seen this file before, so the dates don't match, and off we go. So that all worked reasonably okay, even though it's a little convoluted. We then open up the brace for the data from this file, and we're going to start looking at the actual data. We look through here and we see what we get. First, we see the tags. So we go into the tag list parser. This is pulling out, and just so those of you who don't remember the files structure very well, inside here there's basically just tags that say what these things are. So you can see here that we have this title screen. It says shot index 12, layer index 1. There's really no reason for that other than we decided that's what it is. We could tag this with just title screen and make a new tag for that if we wanted to look it up that way. It's arbitrary, right? That's entirely up to us. So once we do this, we just need in here to know that that's actually going to get parsed. So let's double check that it does. We get an open param here. Let's see what the param actually ended up being. The tag value is 12. That's what we expect. We should be good to go now, and we added the tag in there. The tag ID is what, by the way? Shot index 12. So that's exactly what it should be. We should now, So we do have one bug. once we parse out the close paren, we should have re-gotten the check. So we do have an issue there in here right after when we're actually parsing the tag list. We want to say, oh, let's continue getting tokens, right? Because we want to pick up whatever we would have picked up after the parenthetical. So that check is supposed to now be a semicolon or a comma, so we need to call that again. So that was just a parse bug. We forgot that we had parsed something new and we want to get that check. All right. So if we continue down that, let me just set a breakpoint there that we can jump to. So here we are. So now when we get it, we should be able to do the tag addition correctly and not fall into an error case. So off we go. So now let's see what we get. We get another identifier, and hopefully again we get a tag that makes sense. Layer index 1, that's what it should be. So off we go. That's the semicolon that ends the tag array. So now our tag array should just have those in it. It should have 2 tags in it, and we saw them get parsed. So let's take a look. First tag index is 1525. One pass last index is 28. That doesn't make a lot of sense because we only parsed 2 tags. So how did we end up with so many more tags? Because it should just be 25, 26. So one pass last tag index should actually be 1527, right? Oh no, because there is a tag which is the asset tag type. And in this case, that asset tag type is tag none. Interesting. So I think we've got one more bug here, right? Which is that in end tags, the asset basic category needs to be set in order for this tag array to be correct, or we need to stop having the asset tag category passed in. Let's take a look at how we're doing those end tags. So where are those actually getting called, right? So when we do stamp assets, let's take a look. When we do stamp assets, we go through and we do a set asset type based on the import grid tag stuff. But do we ever actually set that tag ID, add tag, asset none? So we actually need the tag's type ID to be passed here, but that's fine. So that's okay. So I think maybe we're all right. The only thing we need to do is in here, don't do this if the category is asset type none. Right? So I think that we're still probably okay. Again, a little jankier than I would like because there's a lot going on here, and we've sort of re-architected this in place, and so not everything flows the way that you would want. But we can improve that over time. So I think that's correct. We just won't add the basic category tag if one is not specified, and then later when you build one and it is specified, we will add it. So I think that should do what we need it to do. All right, so now when we come through here and do asset none and we do this add tag, it'll only get called, so this time it won't get called, and we should get the right number. If we look here now, you can see 25 and 26, and then 27 is the end tag, which is what we want. So that's all fine. So that looks much better now than it did. All right. So now we've parsed what was in there. That's it. So now we're ready to say, look, let's finish up and build the file. We hit the parsing, and it said, no, it's not time to parse. So what happened? It looks like we got some kind of an error there. And I'm not sure what that is. Presumably, we hit the close brace and left. So we must have hit an error. What was the error, right? So let's take a look. So here we are in error, and the error is unexpected token type. How did we get it? We got it when we were parsing the top level block. And it looks like we required a token. The token we required was a semicolon, and we didn't get one. So the question is, why didn't we get one? Well, we didn't get one because it is, in fact, missing a semicolon. So that's easy enough. Again, just a parse error, and off we go. So, oh, I didn't have to rebuild. We didn't change the code. So let's go ahead and run again. Again, just kind of chipping away at the various errors that we have there. So this time now we've actually made it to here. And I'm going to skip the first one because this is the default block, right? This is this one. So I actually want the second one. Oops, we got, what's... we should have gotten one this time, yeah? Should we not have? Because there's the tags and there's the close brace and... Oh! Well, these don't have it either. That's probably not what the bug was, but... we should at least make our files correctly. Now, it's worth noting that we could not bother with the semicolons if we wanted to just assume that if you see something new, it's, you know, it's different. But I just wanted this to kind of look more like C, so I like having the semicolons in there. All right, so let's save that. And in base game, you can see we've got all the semicolons. So this one was constructed more correctly. All right, so in here, let me run again, and let's see what we get. There's that required token. We run again, and we're getting a required token error on the semicolon. So I think this time we're parsing it wrong because it looks like we've got everything correct in there. And so something's up about this. So I'm going to set a breakpoint there and see what's going on. So here's the first time we call this, and I'm just going to look at the tokenizer to see what it's going to get. Here's the input stream. So it is going to get a semicolon on that, right? It is going to get a semicolon on that. It is not going to get a semicolon on this, though. So this is right before the default block. So it looks like we ate the semicolon on the tag array. Am I right? But the peak token call shouldn't have done that. Did we implement? Oops. Wow. Typing problems today. So it doesn't look weird. I will say this is a dumb way to do this. Like, you would just do that. Right? But still, that doesn't look like the problem because that looks like that would have operated properly. So I don't think that's the problem. But clearly, like, why would you copy it back in when you have a duplicate one right here? You might as well just go ahead and do it, right? So that's a little bit weird. So we should just do it like this because it's just more efficient. That said, you know, the compiler probably figured that one out for us. So anyway, if I take a look a little more carefully now, I want to see like what is going on there because it looks like our peak token is having an issue. So let's see what happens at that line of code. So here we are at the how did we never get to that line of code? That's very strange, right? Because we should have gotten to the tags. I mean, how do we not get to the tags? How did we not get to that breakpoint that I just set when the tokenizer, right, if we look at the input, here's the input. It is parsed the tag array, right? So if it parsed the tag array, what happened? Aha. So yeah, you can see what's going on here, right? If we got to a semicolon, we have an issue because basically that peak token. So we really need to use peak token more is what it boils down to. This is just too ugly, right? We do a peak token, we see if we get the semicolon. The other thing we could do is roll the semicolon parsing into the other thing, but I don't know if we really want to do that. So if you come through here, you can see we peak the token. If we see a semicolon, we bail. If we see an identifier, we get it. We need to then do this as a peak token, right? So we see if the thing is an open paren, then we do a get token on that to retire the open paren, and we can do a sort of make sure that we didn't screw up if we want to here, right? We can do it that way. We can get the open paren, do this, and then peak this token, right? Once we peak the token, we can say, look, what was it? We'll see which one it was. If it's a comma, we'll retire it. Otherwise, we'll keep going. I'm sorry, otherwise we'll bail out on the semicolon. And that way, we're just only looking to see if we're getting a semicolon. If we are, we'll stop, right? That's really all there is to it. Not particularly complicated. So I think that solves a problem we were having there, and now we won't have that weird issue with eating the semicolon. Again, not the cleanest stuff, but I'm fine with that. So let's take a look. Require token now. We should be able to get here more reliably, I think. And so this is the default one. If I come back here now, we should be able to go into the non-default one. We've got the match. Here's the information on the dest file index. It doesn't currently have one. So it's going to overwrite it, right? You can see it doing that there. And now that means we definitely need a full rebuild because it's going into a completely different HHA, which again, we already knew we needed a full rebuild, so it doesn't really matter. So now we're going to actually load the file, right? So we open up the file and we load it all in. So now we've got the entire data there. Now we update our match record so that we know that it's there, right? And that's good. Then we come through here and we say, all right, let's take a look at the contents. By making a stream and asking the ping parser to parse that string. So hopefully we've gotten it all in there. We do, so now we're all good. Then we say it was a plate import. We know that, we were told that. Let's go into process plate import, make sure that works. We set up the width and height. We do the image extraction, which is happening here. Again, it's in debug mode, so it's much slower than it would normally be. We look up the downsample count, we downsample, and then we write the image back to the HHA file, which in theory should just work. Hopefully, right? So here it goes, right? We're writing it back to the HHA, blah, 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 blah. This is all code we had running before. So all that stuff just gets set up, and we remember that we wrote this thing in there, and now the data's out to the file. Happy birthday, right? So then at the end, if the metadata changed or the thing was rebuilt in its entirety, I don't know, needs metadata change? I don't know. We currently just don't set that, right? Like we need to have some way of recording that has happened, and I don't know that we do. So one problem that we definitely have here is like we don't have a comparison for these things, right? Like we need to compare and set the needs metadata. So like somewhere in here, we're running through the files, we're parsing the top level blocks. Every time we get to a top level block, we need to know if we need to do a full rebuild. I think we're detecting that correctly. But if the metadata is out of date and we need to rewrite that, we're not currently doing that. So after this parse, like where all of this stuff comes in, we need to do a diff here, right, that says, all right, do we need, like, right? This needs to get set. And so if we just take a look, needs meta rebuild, you can see that, you know, it just gets set to false, and then it would never get set to true. And there definitely are cases where the HHT file, we change like the tags or something, right? If we've got situations like that, we want to now have some way of diffing the metadata to make sure that we don't need to rewrite that. And so we need a function here, and we can also say, like, I mean, you know, we could make it so that it just gets defined here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say if the metadata is not already scheduled for a rebuild, right? So if needs meta rebuild is not already scheduled, and we detect a difference. So like, so there's a magic function we haven't written yet, right? Snuffleupagus-oriented programming. Imagine we had something that did what we wanted, right? What would we pass to this thing? So we know we need to look at the assets that currently are in there. And we know we need to sort of hand them the stuff that we would have been like handing it, right? And then we would have to do the needs meta rebuild. Now, looking at that, I think this can be deferred, and that's important. If we're doing a full rebuild, we're doing a full rebuild, so off it goes. Really, this thing right here maybe is the right thing to look and see whether we need to do it, because it's already iterating over everything to see whether it needs to do the stamping or not, right? So what I might do is say maybe needs meta rebuild just isn't something that ever actually happens, so we can actually delete that. And instead what we do is we say, look, let's call stamp assets and just say we always call it, right? And maybe it's not even called stamp assets. Maybe what it's called is like update asset metadata, right? And so in here we say, we're going to go through everything, and we're going to make sure that the tags are right for everything in here, and then that's the end of it, right? Make sense? The way we want this to work is to diff the things that it's about to write and not write them if they're already the same, right? So if whatever we're seeing in the asset HHA already is fine, then we don't need to do anything. So what I'd like to do is say, well, all right, we've got, you know, asset string, asset stream here, right, are all happening. And we've got these tag arrays, right, and those are happening. So really all we need to do here is when we do this tag set here, we can diff these two things, right? So we could say, like, is the tag array that already exists different? If it's not, then don't change it, right? So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do is say, well, if the asset type doesn't really matter because that's just in the tag array, so that's actually not a write back. The other thing we can do is say, okay, if these asset strings are already exactly the same, we don't write those back. And then finally, for the error stream, we could just say, if there's no error stream, then we don't have to write that anyway. So that's a pretty simple one. That could probably be just left as it is because it won't actually reserve any space if there are no errors, right? It'll just be like zeros always. So I feel like mostly all we need to do is make write asset string do a diff. So it could be update asset string instead. Let me see how often we call that. It's only here. So if this were update asset string, right? So I'm going to say like, and in fact, oops. Right. So I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to just go to write asset string, and oops. And I'm going to put a to do in there. It's like to do, don't write this if the string is already the same. So, because there's really no harm in writing again, it's just wasteful. Like, there's no need to do this work. So we can save that information and move on. So similarly, the error streams I'm not too worried about because those are just going to get overwritten with zeros usually. And so in a case where there was no errors, no harm done. If there were errors, we do need to save them. So I don't really need to compact those. I think those are fine. So update asset string is really the only thing that should change there. So it's really just the tag array that is the thing that's a little bit complicated. So the update asset metadata call in this case really just needs to do something smarter in this case. So when you're doing the tag builder, what we want to do is just not do this block if the tags actually aren't different, right? And so we know that we've got two tag arrays that come together here and then a type ID, and that's basically what we're going to see. So we just need to say, is that what's already there? Meaning, is the thing that's in the file the same already? So if we looked at the asset HHA first tag index, asset HHA one pass tag index, would they essentially be exactly the same? So I can do this, I think, and make a thing here where we check exactly that. So we can go through this set of tags, we can go through this set of tags, and then we can check this tag, right? And we should be able to now do a direct test to see whether or not these tags are equivalent. So the first thing we can do is check the total tag count, right? So in here, we've got this tag array, right? And then we've got this tag array. And what we could say is if the total tag counts don't match, then we don't really need to look at the tags themselves because obviously the arrays are different. So, you know, we have to rewrite it. So we can say if the total tag count equals if the total tag count equals how many tags are already there, then we can proceed with the diff. Otherwise, we don't need to proceed with the diff because we know it's wrong. And so we can just skip right to rewriting it, right? So if we say, look, here's how many there are in the file at the moment for this asset. There we go. Here's how many are in the file at the moment. Here's how many we want there to be in the file. If those two things are the same, we can diff them. If they're not, then we're done, right? So then we go through and we say, like, you know, test tag index equals whatever that first one was, right? As we loop through here, all we really need to do is say, well, we've got the source tag. So what we can say is like, if the test tag index in any of these is not equal to the source tag, So basically, if the tags aren't equal, then we're done, right? And that's really all we need to do anywhere in here, right? Oops. So I think that's pretty much it. And then the final thing is that last one, the last tag. So this. Right? This tag has to be equal to the special tag, which is the asset type. And so we need to make sort of a dummy tag for that one, if that makes sense. So like this struct here, where we've got HHA tag. This is the type tag, you could say. This type tag is going to have an ID and a value. It's the type tag. I don't really remember what that's called, though. Basic category. The basic category has to be equal to whatever the basic category was going to get set to, right? So in here, we would say, yeah, there's that basic category. And so now we look to see if that one is equivalent, and if it is, then we don't have to write it, otherwise we do, right? So you can see the whole thing. That does the complete tag array diff. We could definitely simplify this by like making this be a routine, right? And maybe we should, but I don't know if we want to or not. So we do need to get tag count, and we do need a tags are equal. And so let's just go ahead and write those two. They're not particularly difficult. So if I come up here and say, okay, here is get tag count. Here is tags are equal. What do those look like? And this is like asset tag array, I think, or like, I don't remember what those were called. They're things that are import tag array, right? So this import tag array, the result of that is just going to be the subtraction of the two, right? So it's just the array one past last tag index minus array first tag index. So really, nothing special there. And then the tags are equal, again, really pretty basic. It's just saying if I have two HHA tags and I want to know if they're the same, I just compare their values. There's nothing more to it than that. So if you remember this guy here, if the IDs are equal and the values are equal, then the tags are equal because there's nothing else in it. And off you go. So from there, we can just look at what we messed up here. Yeah, we don't need to do that. Oops. Let's try that again. So cannot import grid tag to import tag array. Oh, do we not have... Did we never fix this stuff? We probably didn't, because we were being lazy. So you can see here there's a tag. This is a tag array, and we just never actually did that, right? This is what we actually wanted to do, and we just didn't do it. So let's just do it now. All right, so this is just tags in both of these cases. And by the way, we could now make it so that this thing is explicit. Because really the number of people who actually do end tags now is not that many, and they could just be explicitly adding it. I don't really know. So I don't know what we want to do there. Also, is this part actually necessary? Because Okay, so actually, even the thing that I did before was not really necessary. So the end tags call... I think we should just get rid of that. Because, yeah, like, that's not right either. It's already in there. So actually, I'm totally wrong about this, and we didn't actually need to do that, right? This was asset none, and this is not necessary. There's no +1. And so I think we should just get rid of that. It should just be an add tag call that gets made. That's just better. So, you know, that's fine. So that to-do should stick. And I think we probably do want to do it. All right, so, oops. So now we got some easier stuff here too. Instead of writing these things this way, we can just do this, which is nice. And so, you know, like that. And that seems really good. Another way of writing it is just to say this, which is even more concise. And eventually we can probably get rid of that entirely, because that means that now we're doing an import grid tag, but the basic category really doesn't have to get returned there anymore, as far as I know, although I guess it sort of does. So we'll see. So we might leave it that way for now. We'll find out. Again, that basic category is just a little bit squinky. So we'll see. We'll work it through. All right. What's the problem here? These are not tag arrays, but that's fine. What else we got? So looping through these is just tags.tags, which is kind of an amusing statement, but that's what it is. Why is append tags a pointer and the other one isn't? It just should be a pointer. I mean, it just should be passed by value. We don't really need that. Yeah. So anyway, let me just quickly change that, because those are small, so we really don't need to pass them by pointer. We're probably just wasting our time by doing that. All right. There we go. All right, so just working through the errors now. Tags is not a member of import tag array. So I guess that was just a red herring. That's what I just meant to do. Get tag count cannot convert one from import grid tag. Ah, I see. So only that one is. That makes sense. This is not actually necessary because we have the assets here, so I'm not sure why we were getting them off of the builder. Probably because we cut and pasted that code. Well, not cut and pasted it, moved it into here from a place that didn't have access to the assets in another way. But we do, so that's all good. That means that in here too, that needs to be tags, whereas this doesn't, because tags they're different types. So again, that's fine. In here, this is using the builder assets, but doesn't need to, so I'm going to get rid of that again. And then again, that should be this way. In here, when the HHA comes to the combined tags that comes out, has the asset type in there too, so I think that's all good. Update metadata doesn't need to pass the address of that. And so now I think we're good. Yeah. All right, so let's give it one more whirl here and see if we can't get a valid import out of it. I'm going to delete that intro cutscene.hha, and then I'm going to run again. We'll jump right to the first needful rebuilds, because we pretty much know the rest of that stuff's working now, and we didn't change it. Here's us doing our PNG import. The plate has now been processed and fussed with and all that other stuff. So then we go into update metadata. We take a look. There's only one of these, I believe, right? So it's only going to be the first one. And so like if we look at this tag, oops, sorry, I meant if we look at this tags, we should have only one place where this occurs. Although actually, well, I guess now I think about it, we'll have none because there is no grid. So the only tags we should have are here. And the basic asset type, I guess that creates a slight problem for us, which is the basic asset type, we don't actually know what it is, right? If something is a plate, oops. If something is a plate, what is the category? It's just asset plate, right? Yeah. So if something's going to be an asset plate, we need that to flow through the pipeline better. So, excuse me. So when we actually do that plate import, we do need to set one thing. Before we were setting nothing. But we actually do need to set something, which is in here where we do this import plate, we do want to do one thing, which is this. And although there are no other tags that would go in place here, we do need to just set the asset category. So here, this is an asset plate, and we need to write this back to something, right? And in our case, the something is just the 0, 0 element, because that's the only thing we have in a plate, is just one location, right? I believe if we go look at the, what is it, process multi-tile import. So if we look at the various things here, when we have process plate import, it should always do it at 0, 0. So, you know, as long as that 0, 0 is filled with the right asset type, we should be good to go. So I'm going to call that done. All right. So let's jump back to here. I think we've gotten... There we go. I think we've gotten this worked out. So now when we come through here, the tag's type ID should be asset plate, and it is. So then we can set the asset type here, because the asset type would have been 0 before, so that's good. So we come through, and we would have gotten this error, by the way. We look to see whether the tags differ. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the count. The total tag count was 3, and of course before it would have just been 0, so we're not going to ever diff the tags. We're just going to say, look, they need to get written. Since the tags differ, here's us building the tag array that just appends these tag sets together. We produce the combined tag set, which should be 3 tags long, and is. We then set that into the asset. We write out the strings, and we write out the... well, we don't write out the HHA metadata yet. We just mark that as dirty, or should have. However, I don't see us marking it as dirty, so I think that's a mistake as well. So I think we want that HHA to be marked as dirty if any of these things need to be written. You know what I'm saying to you? So that's one more thing I think is broken there. We wouldn't touch this assets anymore. Right? So we'd come out here, we'd be done with that package, and yeah, and off we would go. So do we still have a breakpoint on error? Yeah, so let's run to the next error for now. We probably haven't gotten rid of all the bugs, but let's just see if we have any more parse errors or like obvious errors of that nature in the build before we go any further with it. And while we're at it, we can sort of look here and see, you know, that should start piling things into intro cutscene. Hopefully, I'm not sure if it will or not, but let's take a look. You can see it does appear to be doing so. So, not great. Looks like we definitely have some issues there. because that's just not big enough, right? It should grow significantly beyond that. So I'm not sure what's it should end up like roughly that size, right? Once everything's piled together. So I don't know if I debug break here, what ended up happening. So we're doing an image extraction. So it looks like, hey, we're just processing a lot of big images, and we're processing the debug modes, they're very slow. But nothing has gone horribly wrong yet, so we can keep it going. So maybe it's fine. These are all very large images, and so you really don't want to be in debug mode because we don't even really have optimized pixel processing here, right? We're just doing it on the CPU with floats. We're not even using SIMD. So especially in debug mode, it's going to be horrifically slow. All right, but it's chugging along, and maybe it's writing something in there. We don't really know, but hey, it's getting bigger, and that's good. So that should grow eventually to a large size, and then we can also do an HHA edit dump on it and see what we actually got in there, right? So I think that's good, right? And again, I guess while it's doing that too, one thing I might want to do is take a look at where that dirty flag should go. So if you look at the HHA, the like definition of the thing that stores whether it needs to be written. So here it is. It's called modified. What we need is a way to set modified in some way that's reliable, right? And so whenever you write asset data, it'll get set, and whenever you reserve asset data, it'll get set. But I don't know if that is sufficient. I don't think it is. So I think that's just really, that's not going to express enough. In the in-game editor, when we set one of these, it sets that modified thing to true, and that's fine, but that's not going to cut it for when the metadata changes happen. So inside update asset metadata there, we have to make sure that everybody who might write something actually sets that dirty flag. Asset stream and update asset string will, because they'll call reserve data and write asset data itself automatically does it. So basically, reserve data is fine. The only thing that we care about here is basically here. If those tags differ, then we need to set the file's modification flag to true. I think that's the only thing. All right, we've hit our first error, and I don't even know what file we're on. We may have proceeded to the next file. Let's take a look. It looks like we did. Let's just check here. So file info that we're processing at the moment is base game. So that means that actually we have successfully, in theory, processed our intro cutscene HHA. Now, it's not very big, which is not great. But I think that's just because we haven't closed the file handle yet. So if you look here, we've got size on disk 325, right? Now, one question is, why haven't we closed the file yet? So I wonder, did we forget the file handle close? Because we probably did. Well, I guess not forget. We leave those files open. So I guess that actually is fine. Never mind. Those are supposed to be left open for writing during play. So what error did we hit when we were processing the base game, which is now different? So we made it through that other file with no errors. What did we hit here? We got an unrecognized block type when we were processing a top level block. And so the question there would be like, well, what was it, right? And it's called cover. We don't know what cover is yet. And honestly, that sounds like a reasonable error. I think in parse pieces, we just don't know what that is, right? So we've got obstacles, item, and in cover, you can see we just didn't set it. So I think we want to set that to a multi-tile import that just gets ignored. And I guess, again, maybe what we really should do is in the HHT, when we're actually doing these things, I think maybe we want to just not do anything with them. We could, for example, just comment them out, right? And so if I go up to cover here, I'm just going to move all of these down to the bottom. And so these are just things that we haven't... We haven't really used any of this stuff, and we will want to, but we just don't have any way to do those yet, so we should just ignore them, right? All right, so now let's take a look. We know that one of our files was imported okay. You can see it here, intro cutscene.hha 314.488. It's not as big as this one, which makes me a little bit nervous. So I'm not sure if we really got all of the stuff in there imported the way we should. However, maybe we did. And maybe the reason that's smaller is because we currently have some import size caps that will reduce the size of things if they're too large. What could have happened is, when this was made, that wasn't the case. So that may have been happening in here. What I can do is I can go back now and take a look using HHA edit to see what's actually in there. So what I'm going to do is, remember, HHA edit allows us to do a minus dump. So in there I can say, look, take a look at this intro cutscene, right? And that will dump everything that was in it. If you look at what's happened there, oh, and you know what? This makes perfect sense. If you look at what's happened there, it had nothing in it. So why was that if it had all this stuff? Well, again, if you look at the way we structure this routine, we forgot an obvious thing that needs to happen. At some point, someone needs to call write modifications to HHA, because all of those asset tag array things that we updated, they never get written until the end of the process, right? And so actually inside Handmade import at the end of this, right, we actually need to call that write modifications to HHA function. Otherwise, nothing's ever gonna improve, right? So right here, before we finish, this needs to happen, right? Those modifications need to be written back. Now, we actually need to go through all of them, so we want to have a way of doing that for everything. And I don't know if we have that. I don't think we do. So we want something that will loop through them, and any one that's modified, it will just update it, right? So we would like something that does that. Essentially, we want something here that's like, essentially the exact same routine. It's just, it maps over all of them, right? So what we want to do is have a for loop in here that says for every file in the entire system, if that file was modified, then rewrite it. You know what I'm saying? And so write modifications to HHA. Oops. It's basically something that's just going to do all of that, right? Let's just make sure that that actually works. So if I do that, it's pretty straightforward because it happens to just be a loop over the file indices. So we know we can just go through all of them. And for each one, I can say, look, if it was modified, write it. That's it. It's not complicated, right? So that would allow us to write all of our modifications back, and that should really be all we need there. So in this case, asset source file is not actually the file that we're talking about here. We're actually talking about the asset file. So this was a bug as well that I neglected to pick up there. So there we go. So all that should be relatively clean now. Nothing weird happening. So what I'd like to do now is try a release build and see if we get our stuff built properly from scratch, right? And it probably won't be. We probably still got a few more bugs lurking in there, but we're getting closer. So again, totally clear now, nothing in the directory. I have built a release mode version, so this is the release mode version building here. And now I will run it and see what happens, right? So now it should chew through the files a lot faster because it's at least an optimized build. So you can actually see this number climbing much more rapidly too, right, as the files get written out to it. That should presumably climb to the same number it climbed before because we haven't changed anything. So, well, there's one thing that'll change, which it'll write out the asset arrays. So it plowed through that, and now it's done, and now it's working on the base game. So now, if I want to, I should be able to look at that cutscene one. To be fair, as this thing is going through here, I'm just might as well let this one finish as well, right? And hey, we've started again. Now, weirdly, the head and stuff is missing. I am not sure why that would have happened, but I guess that may be because we've got bugs in our import and we've made a new asset that overrides the asset that should have gone in that place. It could actually just be because the alignment points are gone. I don't really know, right? We can actually look at that if we want to. The way that we would do that is just say, hey, let's pick one of these here. Let's see if we can get the head in there somewhere. Doesn't look like we can. Yeah, I don't see... So it looks like the head is just missing, which is not good, right? So I assume that's a bug, like our import did not work properly, but I don't know, right? Because you can see like everything else is picking it. So it doesn't look like the head is there but not aligned. It looks like it's just busted, right? So okay, but we've gotten through one import, so now it's time to debug like actual errors in the output. Let's take a look at the intro cutscene stuff first. Oh, the other thing we could do is just see what happens if we run the intro cutscene. So, for example, oh, by the way, this should do like nothing, essentially, right? Yeah. So if we run the intro cutscene, presumably we'll also just not get anything here, because if we've got bugs in how we're setting up our tags and stuff like that, we should not see the intro cutscene, or we should see like a buggy version of it. So we do see it. That may, although that may also be because we're still using the older HHA, right? And so we really, I guess, can't judge much from that either. All right, so let's start by looking a little bit further into things. Let's start by seeing what we've actually got in there. If I do a directory here, I have that intro art v2.hha. What I'm going to do is make a like v2 directory, and I'm going to move intro art v2.hha into the v2 directory so it's gone. So now when we load, we only have intro cutscene.hha. That's all we've got, right? So this is the freshly built one. If I now go to the intro cutscene, the question is, what do we see? Do we find any of those plates, or do we not find any of them? And are they in the right order? All that stuff. And now we can go through debugging this part as we go. So you can see like nothing there, right? So it cannot find those, or it is finding them, but they're wrong. So we like packed the data incorrectly or something like this. All right. So let's start down the road of getting that working, but I think we're getting close now. So this is nice. We're kind of getting to the end of the road of this process where once we get this stuff debugged, we should be in good shape and have a nice clean way to build all of our stuff fresh. All right, so if I do an HHA edit dump, let's first try to get this reporting some stuff we can use. So I'm going to put this into intro cutscene.txt, and I'm going to run tab view from the bonus pack on intro cutscene.txt. If we actually look at what's going on in here, right, you can see a big tag array. Here's all our assets. And when we look at the assets, we can see what's going on. Let's just take a look. So looking at all this, you know, it actually looks really good. And that's frustrating because, you know, it would be nicer if it was obviously busted in some really clear way. You can see here that it's got 3 tags, a basic category of 25, which I think is plate, shot index 1, layer index 1, right? And so that's less good, but we can double check this basic category stuff in a second here, and maybe there's something weird going on there, right? We'll see. So all these shots look pretty good, and so I'm not really sure what to make of that. They all look like they got tagged properly. The bitmaps themselves also look reasonable, right? Like they've got actual data in them that the sizes even seem, you know, at least somewhat plausible. So I don't really know, just from looking at this, I was assuming we'd look in here and it was just garbage. I don't know, looking at this, why we're not seeing something on the screen. And it's just like, I don't know, maybe is the data bad? Like, is the bitmap that actually got written a garbage bitmap or something like that? And so I want to have a way of debugging that, and I want to have some, like, I'd like to have some way of looking at what a particular bitmap was in the HHA file so that I would know, right? That would be kind of nice. So here's what I'm going to propose. What if we just added something to our HHA edit? So, you know, it's got these commands in it: create, rewrite, info, dump. And I'll be honest, I don't really know what check HHT is. I think we deleted that, didn't we? Is that still in there? Rewrite, info, dump, create. Rewrite, info, dump, create. Yeah, that's not really in there anymore. That's just wrong. So what I would like to do is say, look, maybe we can do a thing here where we say, what if we have like a -extract that just says, if I give you this HHA file, can you dump like a bitmap from it so that I can look at it, right? And so if I say source HHA, it'll extract and dump like all of the things. I mean, yeah, I might as well just have it extract all of them. There doesn't seem to be a lot of reason to extract just one. I don't think. Yeah, I can't think of it. So you basically say, like, look, extract all this stuff and extract it to this directory, right? Like, that seems reasonable. And so in here, if we say, like, all right, let's have this command where we do a string comp here, and we just say, all right, extract everything from this, then what I'd do is I'd say, get me that information. and then I would read this in, and I would just loop over all of the assets in it and extract them out to different directories, right? So this HHA, a loaded HHA, has all of this information in it. So I can loop over the asset count, right? I can say that there's an asset index that goes from 1 to whatever the asset count is, and for each of those, I can output the asset index of my choice, right? And I could also make it be like there's a stem like that. Maybe I'll say that. So you just say like dest file name stem. And so essentially what you'd do is you'd pass like the first part of the name, and then I'd append like the number of the asset and the dot, whatever it should be, BMP if it's a, you know, a image, or WAV if it's a sound, you know, that kind of thing. So then in here, what I'll do is I'll build the asset name. So I'll say like, you know, dest file name, and you know, I'll do some cheesery here, whatever. Actually, are we using our standard library? Oh, never mind. We're using our standard library. So I can just say, all right, make a dest file name here. I want to have whatever the stem is, and then I want like a dot, and I want like some stuff, and I'm going to dump a bitmap or something. And so here I want something like %s %u, where the %s is whatever the dest file stem was, and then the asset index like comes after it, you know? And so maybe that's a 0.4 as well, something like that. So that'll just like dump all of those things in there, and I can do the ones that I know how to do, right? Yeah. So at the moment, what I'll do is I'll say, look, we don't really handle we don't really handle anything that's not a bitmap at the moment. I'll add sounds at some point. So for right now, we'll just say, look, what was the type of this thing? Like, what kind of asset is it? So when we go into like here, and there's this type field, we're just going to look and say, look, if that type is like an image type, then we can parse it. If it's not, we're just not gonna. It's not gonna happen, my friend. Right? So we just say like, okay, like if it's a bitmap, off we go. If it's not, then we don't, and that's the end of that. So inside here, when we go to do the extract bitmap asset, I'm just going to say like, here's the asset in question, the loaded HHA, and here's the dest file name that I'd like, you know, it to go to. And so all I need to do is just like write this actual function. I don't know if we've got, yeah. So for things that write bitmaps, we've got load BMP. We have a write BMP though too, don't we? I mean, we definitely do. And so it's just a question of me remembering where the heck we put it. Because we have one at the very least. I thought we had one for our PNG tester thing, right? Where we would write out the PNG that we loaded. So, like, this thing. This. Yeah. So we already have a thing that does the writing here. And I guess that's what we want. Maybe? I'm going to cut and paste this for now. I'm not super sure. So I'm just going to say, look, at some point we should probably have some way of, like, for these command line utilities, which we have a couple of for various things, testing really mostly. It seems like we would probably want to have some way of sharing this code between them, you know? That just seems like a good idea. And I'm also going to let this thing not need error streams, you know, if it doesn't need to have them. So at the moment I might say, actually, where is outf? So it does do a check around the out, so this is fine. So all this will be just fine. So what I really need to do here is just call this for each asset in the system, and that should be the end of it, right? So in theory, this should do it for us. So we would need to know the asset, oh, and this is a loaded HHA, this is an HHA asset, and this is a like file stem. Sorry, file name. Actually, that's a bug. It's not this file stem. It's this file name. So when we export each of these assets, what we need to do is grab this stuff out. So we know the desc file name, and that's fine. And we also know the pixel ops, because those are always going to be exactly the same. So out of these, right, we need to figure out which ones of these we're going to do. Now, invert is what exactly? It swaps rows? Ah, so that's if you want to flip it upside down. Okay. So we've got invert, which I don't know whether we need, because bitmaps, it's writing as at a top-down. So ours in memory, if they are top-down as well, we're fine. If they're actually bottom-up, then we need to reverse them, right? So I don't really remember which way we did it, because it's been so long since we've touched that code. But that's easy enough for us to fuss with, right? Multiply A is whether or not we need to do like a pre-multiply alpha, I assume, on there, right? Yeah. So this one, I don't think we want to multiply the alpha at all, because we've already done our pre-multiply if one was going to get done. For swap R, we're going to be writing a Windows bitmap file, so I think we do have to swap the R, because I believe we store, I can't remember again which way we store. Do we do BGRA? We may actually store BGRA internally though. So I think swap R doesn't actually need to be there either. Replicate A just writes it as an alpha image, which again I don't think we need. So the only question is, do we need to invert it? So we may just have 0 for pixel ops. But we may need to do the inversion. I'm not going to pass an error stream. I don't care. And so what we really need to figure out is the rest of this stuff. So if we go back to the HHA file format, that should tell us what we need to know. If you look in here, we've got the information from the HHA asset. And it's the bitmap part of it that we care about, because there's the dim that's what we actually need to know. So inside asset, we've got bitmap.dim, and that should be our width and height there. And then we've got our pixels, and the pixels is going to be wherever the data is supposed to be for this asset. And that was in the actual asset itself. So HHA asset data offset is where that actually is. Oops. Right. So if we look at the loaded HHA, the loaded HHA has everything loaded in it. So this is it. So what we need to do is say, well, whatever that asset was, we need to take the data store and we need to offset from the data store wherever the asset data would have been. You know what I mean? So that's pretty straightforward as well. I'm going to go ahead and call this pixels, and I'm going to grab that out as a thing because we may, when we're debugging this, we may want to look at that value as well. So I think that's mostly everything that we would need to do there in order to write out the bitmaps. I think that's mostly it. So if I go ahead and build this and look through here, it looks like the error stream stuff is a little borked because we're not including that in here. So that's actually okay. Because I cut and pasted it, I'm just going to do this. This would be a bigger problem if I hadn't, right? So there's worth noting. So where do we actually... So we're just doing a printf to standard error for our error stream, right? That's how we're doing that. So in here we can just do this, and that should solve that problem for now. That all's fine, but we do have the problem that inside the test PNG stuff, I need like these utility functions that we had. That seems fine. The swap and stuff. So swap R and B. I don't know where that is. Oh, that's in our utility layer, so that's all fine. We could put these in there as well. Just to avoid, again, just duplicating things unnecessarily. I'd be fine with that. So in here, if we wanted to, we could just say, look, those are there, and that's fine. And then in test PNG, we just get rid of them. Right? So now we just have a problem that our bitmap header is not defined anywhere. And that's because that was something that we've, like, again, just always cut and pasted. So it would be nice, again, if we like had some saner way of sharing these amongst these utilities, because they don't go into Handmade here proper. And that's the only place that we really set up a place to share code amongst features, right? So it's something to think about going forward. Looking at this here, we know we don't need the stream anymore, so I think now we're good. And now we just need to see if this works at all, which maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So in here, let's start by trying to dump something from something that actually works. There's no point in trying a dump from intro cutscene, because intro cutscene's busted. We're going to use the dump to debug it, so we don't want to start trying to get the dump working on that, because it might be busted, right? So let's try dumping like the local HHA. So I'm going to make a dump directory here, and I'm going to say HHA edit -extract. I'm going to say, why don't you extract, I don't know, test1.v2.hha or something. Why don't you extract that into the dump directory, right? So dump / I don't know, test1v2. Go ahead and take a look. So first of all, does that do anything? It does. Does it do anything useful? No. So, you know, close but no cigar. We don't get any points. We don't get to come back next week, or we don't win a case of Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat. Like, nothing happens. So we want to get that dump working so that we can look at these files. So why isn't the dump working would be question number one. What are we doing wrong there? So the bitmap dim, we can look at this, how the header stuff is working. We've got the pragmapack pop bitmap header here, and presumably we're setting the stuff correctly. I don't know if we are or not. Output pixel size. This all seems sane, right? We're just figuring out how to line this stuff up. I mean, that looks pretty reasonable to me. I'm not sure what would be broken about that. Wait a second. Where's it getting the space for output pixel size? Oh, it's just doing it in place. That's actually fine, because we just throw it away anyway. But weird. Alright, so yeah, that does the 2F writes and then the F close. I mean, that should sort of work, right? And that seems reasonable. So I'm not really sure what the problem was there. Let me take a quick look and see if there's something weird going on. So in here, I'm going to jump over to HHA edit. I think this is okay. Seems okay. I'm going to take the exact command line that we used and just place that in here. And then I'm going to make the working directory be handmade /data, and we'll see if this extraction call does anything useful. So stepping in here, oh, and let me set it to be debug mode so we don't have to do fancy footwork to understand what we're looking at in the debugger, since this is not a time critical operation. Shouldn't be an issue. Right? All right. So assuming we get here, which we must because it actually was dumping files, we read the HHA in, and you know, presumably that data store is just the data store, and there it is. So in here we loop through our assets, and when we get one of these bitmap assets, we create a dest file name, which that all seemed to work nicely, so there it is. We then go to extract the bitmap asset, and in here we get a pixel pointer back, right, which should be good, data store plus the data offset, and then we pass in the width and height and all that crap. So let's see what that was. 144 by 217 seems totally reasonable. That yields a total pixel size of 124,992. Let's see if that actual value, which is this here, that should equal what we found in this HHA asset. So meaning the size should be the same, and it is. So I mean, everything looks right so far. We create a header. Let's see if the header is at all reasonable. So here's the header. File type, don't really know much about what that should be, so I'm going to assume that we got that correct. Let's hope. We've got the file size, which is the header plus the pixel size. That seems good. The header size is the size of the header minus 14. Not sure how exactly that works. Okay, I know what we did wrong. See, this is why we should share the code, right? I bet we used the wrong bitmap header. So I'm guessing we've got two different kinds of these, although maybe, no, we don't. Never mind. That is what it looks like. Yeah. Nope, I'm correct. Well, I don't know that I'm actually correct. So you can see in here, here's the bitmap header that the ping thing was using. Right? So here's the one that was doing that right out. So it was actually using a totally different version. The size of header minus 14 part, I'm not really sure where it comes from exactly, but again, so there's two different ways you can write the bitmap, and we have both versions in our just like random crap files, right? Let me just see what happens now. Hey, look. So yeah, again, that's just, we should make a thing that we, like something that's like our command line utilities stuff. Or maybe we just write enough in our platform layer to make the command line utilities use it. That's the other option, is just go full bore, right? So you can see all that stuff dumped properly, so that's great. That means now we can dump our intro one. So if we say like intro cutscene.hha and we dump all that stuff here, we should now be able to see what it is. So this is even more perplexing, because now it's like, hey, all of this stuff is accurate, right? So the only thing I can think of is like, did we screw up the alpha? Like how are we not able to see these when they look correct? Like why aren't we finding them? What's going on? You know what I mean? So something's up, and I'm not sure what. I might save that for tomorrow, because I'm happy with where we ended today. So at least we know, like, hey, our whole packing system's working pretty darn well. But yeah. So we'll stop there. I'll go to Q&A, and we'll pick this up tomorrow, when I think we should be all right. I should check to see how the intro cutscenes are querying their categories. Yeah, I'm just not sure what exactly is wrong there. I'm just not sure. What's your first major gameplay programming topic going to be? We don't really have gameplay programming topics per se. We really only do engine programming topics. For gameplay, we're just gonna, basically just straightforwardly write the entity code that we need for each feature. There really won't be. There really won't be anything else. Try to stay away from gameplay stuff. Synthusiast, do you use string library from CRT? I thought we wrote our own version. Yeah, so in our command line utilities, we don't. We use our own stuff. In the command line utilities, they're written on standard lib so that anyone can compile them, hopefully, on anything, without needing to change it. However, we could decide not to do that later, if that makes sense. So only in the game do we call our own string routines. Have you ever programmed non-blocking TCP sockets? I wonder what is the cost of directly calling recv and send versus select. So the answer actually is yes, I have. The only problem is I've never done it in a super performance critical way where I was trying to like max out the network performance. So here's what I will say. If you're just doing it in a game to like receive packets from the server, then calling non-blocking recv, I would assume would be totally fine. Because the game client just doesn't have very many connections to service, so you should be fine. On a server with a high volume of clients, like let's say you were trying to do a lobby server with like thousands of clients connecting and disconnecting, I don't think you would want to do that at all. because just the iteration over all of those, like saying, do you have a packet, do you have a packet, do you have a packet, is just really wasteful. So I would say you really want to use something like an IOCP or a Windows message, something that's like notification based. So I would just say non-blocking RecV is fine for like 1 or 2 input streams, but if you're going to try and scale it up to like, tens, hundreds, thousands of input streams, I don't think that's a very good strategy. Could you improve the assert macro such that it prints the stringized expression which failed? On Linux, the debugger does not always show which assert failed where. Nope. I can't, because there is no printf. We removed all the CRT stuff. So we would have to add I could if I really cared, which I don't. You could go into the Win32 layer and add the output, like to the platform layer, you add an output, and it would do a printf on Linux, and it would do some kind of an output on Windows. If you just want to fix this on Linux, just change the assert macro on Linux, right? I would also say, man, if on Linux it can't tell you where you did a write to 0, that's kind of terrible. But of course, Linux debuggers are generally terrible, so I don't know what to say about that. I would be shocked if GDB didn't show you where it failed, though. That sounds wrong. You must be using something other than GDB. What is your thought on the structure of config files in Windows that have sections in the close brackets? Do you think it is a good structure for the game config file? I don't have a strong opinion about it. I tend to like things to look more like C, just because that's what I'm used to. But, I don't have a problem with it. How do you implement immediate mode-esque functionality for rendering anti-aliased polygons? I am currently rendering n-gons with a geometry shader, but I am unable to implement anti-aliasing. Well, so just to be clear, there's 2 questions that you could be asking there, and I don't know which one you're asking. If you're asking how do you implement anti-aliased polygons, if you're drawing them in the correct order always, meaning like back to front and no intersections or something like that, then the answer is you don't have to do anything to make them anti-aliased. They just will be, as long as you use some kind of pixel coverage for your pixel shader. But if you're asking how do you render anti-alias polygons in an arbitrary order, you can't. It's not possible. So you have to be using some actual strategy. For example, you can turn on multisampling, which is one strategy for solving order-independent anti-aliasing of polygons. You could implement depth peeling and then post-blend them, like we do in Handmade Hero. That's another strategy. You could use pixel-linked lists, which is yet another strategy. But yeah, like the short answer of what do you do in a geometry shader to render anti-aliased polygons is you can't. You've got to have a back-end pixel pipeline capable of doing order-independent anti-aliasing, and there are several ways of doing that. The most straightforward one is always just to turn on multisampling, because that's what it's made for. But you've got to pick something. There's no. If the fundamental problem is that if you're drawing polygons in an arbitrary order, then you have a problem that you don't know which one was on top of which other one. So your coverage, what it's supposed to actually output as a result, is only known if you know what all the samples for that pixel were at some final time, right? You can't do it any other way. Now, there is one method I didn't mention. I was listing a few there. Another one is to change your definition of edge anti-aliasing to be order independent. And some people have done that, but it doesn't really do usually what you want for high quality visuals. You can look at basically alpha functions that are not over. So the standard alpha function that we use is called over, which is like this over this. And then whatever the alpha is, it basically takes what's underneath it and blends as much of itself in as it needs to, right? And so there are other alpha functions and that aren't order dependent. Over is order dependent. And you can switch to one of those. That's yet another option. But again, you have to, it's a pixel pipeline issue, not something that happens in the geometry shader, unless I'm missing what you're trying to say. Would trying to manage entities in my own game engine, when trying, I'm just going to rephrase this because I think this is what he's saying, is when trying to manage entities in my own game engine, just me on my own, do you think the entity component structure is worth considering? Or am I just giving myself too much work when it's just my own code? Yeah, generally speaking, I guess what I'd say is we've talked about entity systems a lot before, and I would just emphasize that I think it's just a bike shed problem. People massively overcomplicate entity things, and it's just dumb and isn't necessary. What you should do is just write what you need the entities to do in code, and whatever falls out of that data structure-wise is fine. It's really the wrong place to focus that kind of systemic database style thinking, because the most important thing to understand is that anything that you impose as a hard requirement on your entity system is a fundamental limitation on your gameplay, right? If you're just writing your entities in C as C code, then literally anything the computer can do can be in your game, right? Once you start piling systems on top of it and say the entities have to be implemented in terms of these systems, now you have restricted the set of possible games you can make to the things those systems support. In the case where you're dealing with something incredibly specific with hard requirements like transaction systems for banking ATMs or whatever, where there's not a lot of crazy functionality you're going to want, but there are a lot of hard constraints like replicability, fault tolerance, transaction logging, blah, 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 that's when it becomes important to say, let's trade flexibility for some set of, things we get back by just implementing things in this system. We know we get all this stuff, so we're willing to make it harder on ourselves to implement the things we're actually implementing in order to get all these things back. Totally reasonable, right? Gameplay is not that way. Gameplay, you want to be able to write anything at any time. You don't want to have to stop and go, oh crap, I wanted to add this gameplay feature, but I realized that the entity component system that I wrote doesn't support that. Now I've got to go rewrite that system and then come back and write the gameplay code, and it just isn't sensible. And so the most important thing to remember is like flexibility in gameplay code, I think, is king. I don't do game design really, so, I'm not going to sit here and tell you exactly what you should do or what you shouldn't do, but the game designers that I respect the most, they just don't do that kind of crap, right? They don't make these like systemic things because they know that every systemic step you take is reducing the space of things you can do in your game. And that only makes sense when you're intentionally trying to carve out a space like that. So I don't know. Oh, I see John is here, actually. John, was that a reasonable explanation of it? You're really the expert on game design systems. So, I would say whatever you say is probably the best advice on things like this, but I don't know exactly what you would say. I see you saying don't bother with component systems, which is part of what I said, but I said something perhaps a little bit to the side of that, and I'm not sure if you would necessarily agree with it, but also, Toy Deng says, what should I choose, Xlib or XCB? I'm not enough of a Linux expert to tell you what to do on Linux. Sorry. I just, yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask. So John says, yeah, I haven't thought in a while to explain the walling yourself in thing, but that is 100% true. It's like playing Go. When you build a strategic structure, you are also filling in the board and ruling out possibilities for yourself. So yeah, I mean that I would think people should consider that a much more definitive answer. I mean, that's John makes the most like intricate gameplay sort of things that I know of in terms of games that I think were great. And so I just feel like if he's not singing the praises of these like systemic kind of approaches, I think they're probably not so good. And it's not to say that they might not have a place in some other, like there's realms where they might make sense. The example that comes to mind is like Puzzle Script or something. Like there's realms where you might say, look, the whole point of this thing is I'm trying to make a family of games that can only do these things. Like, the point is to wall yourself in, and if that's what you're trying to do, then maybe a systemic approach makes sense. But if you're just trying to make the best game you can for some specific game you're writing, walling yourself in just seems self-defeating. And if you got all these great benefits from it, it might make sense, but you don't. That's the real problem, is you're making a very significant trade. You're giving something very valuable up, and then you're really just not getting anything back, right? You get back very weak sort of benefits, like really pretty, if they're even benefits at all, And so in the case of entity components, I think it's a pretty easy choice to say this just doesn't really make any sense. I've been running my own game render loop, but I've been having trouble getting the loop timing to be constant. I seem to get a stutter or a skip in motion, but it's not because the render procedure takes too long. Any ideas what could be the issue? Sorry, I know it's much not to go on, but any ideas would be helpful. Yeah, so first of all, I guess what I would say is you're not alone. Windows in particular, so you would probably not be having this problem on like a PlayStation or something. But Windows in particular, and PCs in general, are very bad at doing things like guaranteeing consistent frame timing. Now there's two things that can be going on here. One is that in general, if you are not using some kind of a hard clock, and really the only one that I know of in the PC that you can use is the VSync, the VBlank interrupt. If you're not using some kind of a hard clock tied to the frame refresh, then you're kind of out of luck for consistent frame timing. So I'd start by bifurcating into two halves. There's the type of game loop which tries to always hit VSync and then ask the graphics card to stall on VSync. That, as far as I know, is the only way to do jitter-free rendering. I don't know of any other way. If that is what you're doing and you're getting stuttering, what I would encourage you to do is try to run your game under something like Nsight and look to see what's going on with the graphics card. Is it correctly hitting those boundaries or not? Can you get some information from the graphics card about what's going on? That may help you. If you're trying the other route, meaning you just flip as fast as you can and you let it tear, or you're using a monitor that has flexible refresh rate, then the problem is usually in the timing. Because the problem at that point becomes what you're measuring is usually not what you need to measure for smoothness. So if you think about it, the way a lot of people do it is they present a frame to the screen, and at the time when they made the present call, they snap a clock value. Then when they get to the next time they do a present call, they snap the clock value, and they use the delta between those two to know how far to advance everything forward in time. The problem with that, of course, is it's actually sort of a little bit too late. You're then using what the previous frame time was to say how long this frame should be. Now, that can be okay if you actually timed what you thought you timed, right? And you have no frame time based effects, such as motion blur. If you have motion blur, you're done. But if you don't have motion blur, you're okay, because there's no grammar that says which frame is supposed to be which time, so you can still fudge it there, right? But the problem is, even if you don't have motion blur, you still end up with, you have to time the right thing. Timing the present to present doesn't actually tell you how long the frame was on the screen for, because you don't know when that present actually got committed, and you don't know when the next present will be committed. So what you really need is information back from the graphics card on micro timing, which says, here is how long these frames were actually on the screen for. As far as I know, no one actually does this correctly. And in fact, Adam Ladovach, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name because I've never heard it pronounced. The guy from Crow Team. This guy, right? He actually was pushing for this on the Vulkan advisory board. I remember this. I don't think they ever actually did it. Like, he explained all that stuff. He's like, look, these things have to be timed properly in order to get the frame updates to not have micro stutter in them, like little bits of wobble in the frame time. We have to know like exactly how long the frame was on the screen for, because if the frame was on the screen for, you know, a few milliseconds less than the times between the present calls, then we're actually updating the game further than it should have been. So although the overall average frame time is correct, what we're displaying to the user has like micro stutter in it, right? Because we updated it a little bit too little on this frame and a little bit too much on that frame, and the user can see this wobble, right? Really, really perceptive of him, and he's totally right. And I don't think they ever did it, unfortunately. So I don't know if that helps. Ideas Guy says Ladovats might be the way to pronounce it. So let's say Adam Ladovats. Also, I mean, assuming that there's pronunciation differences throughout, his first name might be pronounced differently as well. All right, I think we're done with questions. So I think we'll call it a day. All right. So we're getting a lot closer, and so I think we're almost done with our final asset pipeline, which is great because it'll be nice to have that thing baked. And then we can just build the game from scratch all the time, and it's pretty easy to have everything. Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty excited to have that kind of be done and to be able to ship a thing that's like, okay, here's like how we just do packaging, and you can, you know, dump things and repack things and do it all, and then that's just done, and it's out there, and we don't have to care anymore. So that'll be really nice. And so hopefully tomorrow we'll get a lot of the way towards that goal. There's other things, even if we get everything working tomorrow, there's other things we got to do. We got to finish sound stuff up just to make sure those pack properly now and load properly. And we should do a little bit with fonts. So we got a couple cleanup things we still got to do, but we're getting pretty close, and I like it. That's about it for today. I'll be back here tomorrow to try finishing up some of that stuff. If you want to follow along at home, you can always go to handmadehero.org and pre-order the game. It comes with the source code. If you want to play around with it, maybe you can beat us to the debugging. Try debugging it tonight on your own, see what you can do. Also, we recently released our comic, Meow the Infinite. If you're interested in checking it out, you can always read it online. If you go, it's a pretty easy way to get to it if you're on Handmade Hero, actually. This little guy here just automatically brings us to all of our sites. So you can just click on Meow the Infinite and the comics here. First issue's up for reading. Check it out if you get a chance. Let us know what you think. Until tomorrow, everyone have fun programming, and I will see you on the internet Take it easy, everybody.